Well, good evening, everybody. My name is Bert Dicht, and I am Managing Director of Membership for the National Space Society. And on behalf of my colleague Larry Ahern, Vice President of Chapters, I'd like to welcome you to our National Space Society Space Forum. Today's program is Bringing Columbia Home, the Untold Story of a Lost Space Shuttle and Her Crew. As always, I'd like to just go through the agenda real fast. We'll do some virtual etiquette. I've got a few NSS announcements, and a couple of our panelists will be just providing some additional information. Then I'll talk about the upcoming space forums and town halls. Then we'll get right into the program, and we'll close with the virtual door prize of the 4 copies of our book. And remember, you must be around to get that prize. So please stay on if you can. And then we'll close out for the evening. As always, in terms of our virtual etiquette, feel free to submit a question using the Q&A. They're seen by the panelists directly. It's easy to pull those out and answer them directly, but feel free to use the chat function as well. We only ask that you be respectful of all the panelists and the audience. We did get quite a few questions that were submitted, as always, and I know a lot of them will be answered as we go through the program. But again, feel free to submit a question, and we'll do our best to get them all answered. I always like to show this slide about giving to our cause. If you're enjoying programs like the Space Forums and Town Halls, please donate to and support the National Space Society. We appreciate all the support we've received in the past, so I thank you in advance for any donations you make. We are a not-for-profit organization, volunteer-based organization, and your support really helps us accomplish our goals. I will put this link into the chat as well. Also, at the end, please feel free to complete the Space Forum survey. It only takes a couple of minutes to complete. It is completely anonymous. And I can't tell you enough how much we appreciate your great comments. It really helps us in terms of planning and also providing the best value for these space forums. So please do that. You'll get a link that will take you right to it at the end of the session. Also, wanted to remind everybody so that you can put this onto your calendars. We've got ISDC 2025 coming up next year. June 19th to 22nd, 2025. It's going to be here in Orlando, and we intend to make this one a really special International Space Development Conference, leveraging all the things we have here on the Space Coast. So you're going to have a great time. So I encourage you to start thinking about it. The website is up, but registration is not yet open. And we're going to be working on getting that done as soon as possible. We're going to have some great speakers and great sessions for you. So hopefully you can join us next June. And that'll be the 43rd International Space Development Conference. And tying into that, we want you to come here to the Space Coast. We are doing a flagship tour of the Kennedy Space Center on September 19th to 22nd. The registration is now open, so you can secure your launch seat today. It's going to be 4 days, 3 nights. It's going to take you all to the Space Center. A lot of places you're going to really love seeing. These are a couple pictures from our tour back in January. It's a great opportunity to meet fellow space enthusiasts, fellow NSS members. All the information is on the website, galacticmedallion.com/NSS. I will also put that into the chat as we move forward. But I also have 2 very special guests with us tonight. One is Elizabeth Snyder, who of course is an NSS member and the owner of Galactic Medallion, who helps organize the tours. And also Dr. Kirby Runyon, who you might remember did a great Space Forum for us a couple months ago. He will be on the agenda to do a presentation. And of course, one of our guest panelists tonight too, Mike Leinbach, is part of the tour, who will be doing a behind-the-scenes tour of the Atlantis Space Shuttle Orbiter. So it's going to be a great tour. Elizabeth, I just want to turn it over to you to just see if you'd like to add anything, and I know you'll be available to answer questions in the chat.
Thank you, Bert. And it's just exciting to have everybody here, and certainly to be part of this space forum featuring Mike Leinbach and his wonderful book, Bringing Columbia Home. On the pictures that you see on your screen, it shows Mike in the middle, kind of behind one of the engines of the Atlantis orbiter, which is one of the visits that we make during our 4-day, 3-night all-inclusive tour. We do, as Bert said, bring you behind the scenes of certain places. It's an all-inclusive tour, beautiful waterfront rooms at the local Courtyard by Marriott that overlooks the Space Center. Featured guests like Dr. Kirby Runyon, who will be speaking to us during our dinner. And we have the opportunity to really mingle and get to know fellow NSS members and see a few things that you might not have the opportunity to see otherwise. We're also offering add-ons for those of you who may not have been to the Florida Space Coast, to do an airboat ride, also to visit the Valiant Air Command, the Warbird Museum. We have an exciting visit to the Space Force Station. And for those of you who might be interested, a scenic helicopter ride that will let you see from about 500 feet everything that we visited during the tour. So if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. As Bert said, going to the website galacticmedallion.com/NSS. And I'll also post in the chat another link, which was NSS-tour-details. And that will give you more insights insofar as some of the add-ons. So thank you for joining us. We do have limited seats available. We have several people who've already signed up. So we are limiting it to 20, and certainly you'll be able to meet Mike Leinbach in person. And after you hear his compelling story today, I think you'll be very, very excited to meet him in person and to see this fabulous spacecraft of the Atlantis, which lives in our Kennedy Space Center. So thank you so much. And Kirby, I look forward to seeing you as well.
Likewise, Elizabeth, thank you. It should be a great trip.
Very good. Thanks, Elizabeth. Thank you, Kirby. And everybody, look for an NSS reminder email as well that will be coming out shortly. And it looks like I misspelled reminder, so sorry about that. But feel free. We'll be reaching out to you and ask any questions that you have about the tour. So we're looking forward to that. So what's coming up next in terms of our space forums? Coming up next week, Robert Zubrin is going to be talking about his new book, The New World on Mars. Robert just finished up the Mars conference, Mars Society conference that was held in Seattle. So we're looking forward to hearing more about that as well. And we'll be doing the same thing. We'll be having a virtual book door prize with this new book. Then on September 12th, we've got a conversation with John Zarella, who is the former CNN space reporter. And he has a lot of great stories to share about covering the space shuttle program. And then on September 19th, we've got a town hall. And this town hall will feature our education interns. So you're going to be hearing everything that NSS does to help inspire the next generation. And we're actually going to be doing this live from the KSC tour, probably at the Marriott. Our presenters will be virtual, but we'll be live from the Marriott during the tour. Working on everything for October, November, December. So hopefully I'll have a lot more to share once we move into the next Space Forum on the 22nd. Hopefully be able to share a little bit more about the schedule. So we look forward to that. And now let's get into our program for the evening. So it's my pleasure to introduce our special guest, and we also have another special guest who is joining us as well. So let me just tell you a little bit about Mike Leinbach. He was the final Space Shuttle launch director at the Kennedy Space Center. He had a very distinguished career for working for NASA starting in 1984, I believe. When he, in 2003, following the breakup of Columbia, he led the initial recovery efforts there in Texas and Louisiana. So that's what he's going to be talking about. And of course, he co-authored the book with Jonathan, Bringing Columbia Home. So we're going to hear more about that. And after he retired from NASA, he went to work for ULA, United Launch Alliance, integrating the Atlas V and the Starliner, which I know some people will have some questions about as well. Also tonight, we've got Jonathan Ward, who is a space historian, author, and Jonathan had joined us way back in October 2021. His most recent book was working with Eileen Collins, Through the Glass Ceiling to the Stars, telling her amazing story. And he and Eileen joined us way back then for a Space Forum. Jonathan is a fellow of the Royal Astronomical Society and a NASA JPL Solar System Ambassador. And he does these amazing cruises where he is the cruise astronomer. So hopefully he'll share a little bit about that tonight as well. But of course, he co-authored Bringing Columbia Home with Michael. And also we have another very special guest, Jerry Schumann, who is a NASA program executive. He was the Mishap Investigation and Institutional Safety Officer for NASA. And he was also on part of the recovery efforts for Columbia, and he is joining us as well tonight. So we've got Mike, Jonathan, Jerry, thank you so much. We are looking for a really interesting program. I'm going to stop sharing right now and turn this over to Mike.
Okay, well, thanks, Bert, and welcome everybody. I think I'll kick this thing off, and just a summary of the accident on the next page. So who's driving? Jonathan?
I'm driving it. Yep.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, let's see. Going back in time, launch day, January 16th, 2003. Of course, we had 7 astronauts on board. Piece of insulating foam broke off the external fuel tank, striking the leading edge of the wing of Columbia. The insulating foam, folks, if you've ever used that foam at home, it comes out of a can. It comes out gooey and then hardens. Put it around pipes and to seal cracks and openings. The foam on the external tank is very similar to that. It's an open cell, it's a closed cell polyurethane type material and very lightweight, but that was enough to do the damage to the vehicle. The extent of the damage was unknown. We didn't know, we didn't have any good pictures of the damage, and any request to get pictures on orbit was denied. The end of the mission, February 1st, the crew was cleared to re-enter, and because we had decided incorrectly, obviously, that it was safe to come home. We told the crew about the foam hit about halfway through the mission, just in case they got a question about it from the press on the runway after landing. But it did damage the leading edge of the wing in some fashion, and then during re-entry, the plasma gas got inside the wing, and essentially Columbia failed by the left wing melting from the inside out and then coming off the ship. Ship went into a flat spin and broke up aerodynamically. The communication with the crew was lost over Dallas. The initial debris field that we estimated was 250 miles long and 20 miles wide down in southeast Texas. No one on the ground was injured during the incident. This is the best view of the foam that we had. I can't begin to tell you how many times I've watched this video along with everybody else. But you can see the foam coming off near the attach point up front, where the nose of the orbiter attached to the tank. And it came down and hit the leading edge of the wing about 81 seconds into flight.
We've got another view from another angle.
Got one other view. You can see it striking just aft of that really dark area on the wing, and that's an area right between the reinforced carbon leading edge of the wing and the first row of tiles. And here again, we do not know we never did know the extent of the damage. We did some analysis of it, but we're never able to prove conclusively that we had fatal damage to the ship. This is a picture. Go ahead, John.
I was going to say these are pictures that were taken of Columbia while it was in orbit. This one is from the Air Force Maui Optical and Supercomputing Site. So you can, the area of the wing that was damaged is covered up by the radiator panels here on the cargo bay door. So we were not able to see that area of damage on Columbia from the ground, and neither was the crew able to see it from inside the spacecraft. This is a view from inside the crew compartment looking back, and again, the payload bay covers that area of the wing that was struck.
And I get the question a lot about, was there an arm on board? Could we have done a spacewalk? You see the space hab pressurized module there. So with that in place, we did not have the robot arm and the payload bay of the orbiter. So that was just not an option for us. This is the ground track predicted coming over the coast of California, transiting over Texas, and then landing here at the Kennedy Space Center.
You know, it's helpful to remind people that when the space shuttle was cleared to land, they fire a deorbit burn halfway around the world from the landing spot. So they fired the burn over Australia or near Australia. And essentially at that point, then the Columbia came in as a glider. You have one opportunity to land, and that's at the designated landing spot, in this case, Kennedy Space Center. And so the orbiter then proceeds to bleed off energy by doing a series of aerodynamic braking types of things at S-turns to bleed off energy as it's coming across the ocean and across the US. And again, as it was coming, everything seemed to be going okay. They started getting some anomalous readings inside the left wing as it was approaching Dallas, and then communication was cut off when the space shuttle reached Dallas, or the Dallas area.
Here's a map of the initial search area and the final search area. It's all in southeast Texas. Some of the debris went over that river and that reservoir in between Texas and Louisiana and landed in Louisiana. But that was our initial search area, and then we had the different command centers set up. And Jerry, which command center were you at?
Well, I started out in Lufkin for the first day, and then the second day they sent me out to Hemp Hill.
Okay.
They had asked me to go out there and be the eyes and ears out there for NASA and keep an eye on the astronauts that were going out there to work, to also look for human remains recovery in that area. And that took, for the first 2 weeks of our time out there, was searching for nothing but human remains in that particular area. The astronauts would be ferried in by helicopter, and then they would do the search around with helicopters to see if they could see anything from the air and what they could find. And they would go down or either land and see what was on the ground, or they would radio in, and we would go out to the particular site and check it out and see what it was. And a couple of times we ended up coming across where the remains had finished landing.
You know, it's helpful, I guess, to point out on the day, Mike and I talk in the book about parallel confusion. The folks at Kennedy Space Center were waiting for Columbia to come in, and they didn't hear the double sonic booms that usually happen 3.5 minutes before landing. It was just nothing but silence. The people in this area in Texas were hearing tens of thousands of sonic booms as Columbia broke up. And right after the accident, nobody knew exactly where to start looking for things here. So you had this huge debris footprint that needed to be searched. You know, the rapid response team that Mike was head of as part of his role at NASA always assumed that if there was an accident with the shuttle, it was going to happen within view of either the launch site or the landing site. And so we were not prepared for this kind of thing to happen out over a remote area of the country. And also with this map here too, it's helpful to point out that had Columbia broken up a minute or two earlier, the debris would have come down in the Dallas suburbs. Had it broken up a little later than it did, everything would have ended up in the Gulf of Mexico, and we might never have found out what happened to Columbia and her crew.
Yeah, and it was a lucky thing there that nobody on the ground was, you know, injured by any of the debris coming down.
Yeah.
I did respond out there one time, and to a problem in a roadway, and we found out that one of the main gears had come down, hit the roadway, and shattered the roadway.
Wow.
So the impact that these particular debris items were doing to the ground were significant. And so the first 2 days, we were asked to make sure that all the public places were free of any debris in there so they could be opened back up. And, you know, one of them was schools, and make sure the schools were safe for the kids to go to school, and then start looking for other areas.
Yeah. This is an example of one of the fuel tanks on board of Columbia that came down in some people's backyard. It was still with propellants inside it.
Mhm.
Yeah. So the
Yeah.
EPA was a big lead. I mean, was the lead in a lot of this recovery to make sure it was safe.
Yeah, in fact, I was the only safety person out there at the time that could do toxic readings on the first 2 weeks.
Wow.
You know, so the tanks, I got to check out all the tanks. One of the times I had to send a crew of the FBI agents that were with me to a hospital for a check because they decided to look inside one of the tanks, and it was the N204 tank. And it still had residual inside. So I had to give them a night off in the hospitals.
Wow.
This is a typical search. The terrain out there was very, very rural, very wooded, thorns on the side of the trees and the weeds. You can see this guy going through some swampy area. So it was a very, very difficult search area. The way we first plotted the center line of the debris, the first couple of days of the recovery, as pieces of Columbia were found and turned in, we plotted them on a big map in our command center at Barksdale Air Force Base with those map push pins, those colored head push pins. And so for the first couple of days, that's how we got a better handle on where the debris actually was.
I remember the NTSB told you initially you thought you'd be lucky if 5% of the orbiter came down, and even within just a couple of hours of the accident, the first of the human remains were found, and that's what really brought the local communities into a very heavy volunteer search and recovery effort. One of the great coincidences, sorry, Jerry, is that all of the Texas judges in the various counties had done practice sessions with the incident command system in the previous summer. And so a lot of these local communities had just recently trained in how to do this kind of search and recovery in an emergency situation.
Yeah, and you were talking about the townspeople that came out to help with the search. As you can see, these members are not really, you know, associated with us, but they are here you have the state troopers that were sent to us to help us along. A funny story for me was the fact that at the second night, I was sleeping in Lufkin, and two of these officers decided to give me an escort going back to Lufkin after we'd done searching, and it was about midnight. And they just told me to keep up, and I told them, I'm driving a Kia. You guys better wait for me. Anyhow, they did give me a direct, escort all the way back to the hotel, made sure I was safe there. So I tip my hats off to those guys that helped us out. And then, of course, this is the VFW in this picture that you see here. And folks volunteered around the clock to man that VFW and make sure that the searchers were fed. In the first 2 weeks, they fed over 22,000 meals out of donations, what they had in store, and also what that we could get there. So they didn't ask for any money for this or anything. They just took it upon themselves and fixed food. And I tell you what, it was some of the best food for being in that area. You know, I pitied the guys back in Lufkin. They weren't eating as good as we were.
Yeah. And this was a town of about 1,000 residents that was doing this, putting up with more than 3 times the town population of searchers that had just descended on them literally overnight.
Yeah, now initially we had the National Guard with us during the first 2 weeks. They helped us out tremendously out there, but we ended up with one of the questions I get a lot of times is, hey, didn't they give you machetes or anything else out like that to use to get through the thick woods and the briars and everything else? Well, they did the first 2 weeks until we had one of those souls from the National Guard ended up cutting his finger off. And so we decided to, right then, I put out an edict that we stop, take away the machetes from anybody. So we didn't do anybody else any harm. We were already in a recovery effort as it was. So that's where you ended up with the walking sticks. And most of us that were out there doing the walk, we ended up bringing back our walking sticks with us from out there that we made into a great tool to do the search out there with. And then, of course, you saw the picture back not too far ago of in the swamp. Well, we got told when we were in the swamp, I remember that place very well. I was down about 200 yards from there in chest deep water. And that's when one of the rangers told me, hey, you know, we got gators in this water. So, you know, kind of put a little fear in us and what we were running into out there. And that's when we finally took it upon ourselves there to put together a training session for all new searchers that came in on what type of wildlife they were going to run into and what kind of equipment they would need to get through the briars and everything else. So
Wow.
that was with all the volunteers help that we were able to do that.
This puddle is interesting. A lot of the debris was very, very light, and that kind of just fell out of the sky in the western debris zone. The heavier pieces stayed on their ballistic trajectory till they impacted the ground. This particular puddle had part of a major part of the engine, one of our engines, down at the bottom of that pit. There's the power head that was dug up. That was about 12, 13, 14 feet down in that mud, because that hit the ground at over 1,500 miles per hour. We recovered pumps off of the engines, and there's still pumps out there. There's no doubt, because we only recovered 3 out of the 6. Anyway, the point is that the heavier pieces landed farther east, as you can imagine. The lighter pieces just kind of slowed down in the atmosphere and fell out of the sky, and generally landed in the more western areas.
Yeah, Mike, and that particular one too, that was on a golf course over there. And the only way we found out about it is somebody reported a new water hazard on the course. It had dug itself so deep it brought up water. So we went over there and pulled that out. Like you said, that was pretty deep down in there. You wouldn't have known it was there, you know, unless
Right.
the hole in the debris around it.
There you can see the where we recovered the crew. Hemp Hill was sort of the closest town to that area. We recovered all crew members, returned them to their families for internment. So a real success story there. But it also took 12 days until we found all of them, and so it was quite a intensive search for the crew. Our principal actions were to find the crew, find the debris, and also, as we were doing that, not hurt anybody on the ground, and so that was very successful.
After, yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, after the crew was recovered, it was decided that it was just too dangerous to keep having volunteers putting themselves in harm's way, and so the Texas Forest Service suggested that the U.S. Forest Service be brought in. The firefighting teams come in who are trained in doing grid searching. This now became a salvage type of operation, a recovery and salvage type of operation, and so they needed people who could cover that entire debris footprint, and that entire 250 miles by 10 miles center line. And so they set up 4 camps along that pathway and staffed them with 1,000 searchers each, from being brought in from all over the country, wildland firefighters. And eventually over 20,000 people ended up being involved, coming in, working for a couple of weeks at a time at one of these camps, and then rotating out, and new camps being brought in.
And that was a great move to ask them to come in. We paid them. We hired them to come in to do the search for us, and they were prepared to do it. They bring their own bathroom equipment and kitchens and their tents and all that. So that was a real coup, because we didn't know how we were going to cover all that area that we had to search. We ended up walking an area out in Texas, 120 miles long by 10 miles wide, And that's what, and it took 3 months to do that with those 20,000 people. And so without them, I don't know what we would have done, frankly, but we did use them, and they were very, very good support for us.
Yeah, the one thing that we always talk about, with me being the mishap investigation program executive after this event, is the fact that we have never had anything in our contingency plans for use in other federal agencies. And so this was a big learning effort for us as well. We started using other federal agencies to help us in any type of contingency matter after this, and made sure that was in our plans to do so. So that was a big plus for us. They taught us a lot of things of searching. They were dedicated to the effort. They didn't even want to go home. They were happy to be there, and they were proud to be there. And that was the fun thing about it, is I've never seen a more group of people that are doing a recovery effort that are so proud to be able to do it. And these folks were.
Yeah, this is just some of the views here, some of the recovery along the way. But again, just lines of people doing grid searching, walking at arm's length, covering all of the ground between Dallas and Fort Polk, Louisiana, and also covering the water. There were reservoirs along the way and lakes along the way. The Navy spent more than 1,000 hours on the bottom of Toledo Bend Reservoir looking for cameras from the belly of Columbia, which would have taken pictures of the external fuel tank, and never did find those.
No, we never did find them, but we did have on our list also the recorders, which ended up playing a significant role in determining what actually happened. Yeah. So we did have helicopter operations. This is the crew that ended up, we had a fatality with this crew where they crashed after doing a search one day. I got called to go down and check out what happened. We lost the pilot. It was a Jules Meyer. And then, of course, we lost one of the Forestry Service folks, Charles Predick, who I knew very well and was able to be, pretty close to talking to him numerous days before this happened. We also had NASA folks on there. As you see, the two middle folks there in the green are both NASA quality assurance folks. And then the one on the end is a USA quality assurance. So they were significantly hurt, but they were not fatalities. They were riding in the back, and pretty well were able to walk away from there.
But the way the helicopters worked was, we walked that area, the 120 by 10 mile wide big rectangle. We walked that, but then on either side of that 10-mile zone, that's where we flew the helicopters looking down for debris, and found a little bit doing it that way, but mostly the debris we found was by the searchers on foot, no doubt.
Yeah.
With Charles Krennick being a member of the Texas Forest Service and a local resident there, this really kind of cemented the relationship between the people of Deep East Texas and NASA. And so the motto started there. Their mission became our mission, and they even they had just dedicated this star monument in Hemp Hill, Texas, and they redid it after the Columbia accident to put their mission became our mission on there. They're very proud of reminding people that 7 people didn't die as a result of Columbia. It was 9 people, and two people gave their lives as part of the search for bringing Columbia back home again. So the people in Hemp Hill have also started their own museum there, which is just a fantastic place. If you ever find a reason to get out to Deep East Texas, I strongly encourage you to go to Hemp Hill and see their Remembering Columbia Museum.
Well, let's see. We already talked about the astronauts. We found them and returned them to their families. We recovered about 38% of the orbiter by weight, and that represented a little over 84,000 pounds. And that last line there, greater than 10 times all previous reentry debris found, that refers to all satellite reentries in the history of spaceflight for all countries of the world. So of all the entering spacecraft that we found over those 50 years, whatever the number is, Columbia represented 10 times that amount of debris just by herself. And so that led us to talk about what are we going to do with this debris? since it is so significant and very, very, very different materials, from glass to paper and clothing to titanium, and all just kinds of stuff. So we'll get into that here shortly. That's a picture of the reconstruction hangar where we collected the debris out in Texas, staged it in Barksdale, and then trucked it back to the Kennedy Space Center on flatbed trucks. And then we took over the Spaceport Florida hangar and laid out a grid on the floor of the hangar per NTSB's recommendation. That particular picture there, that's out in Barksdale at the staging area. And here we are back in Florida offloading the truck, and we had a triage arrangement set up in the hangar to separate the different types of materials. If it was obvious where it went straight to the grid. If it wasn't obvious, it went over to engineering for analysis to figure out where it belonged. If it had human remains on it, that was treated separately. And anything that was toxic with the thrusters and whatnot, that was treated separately as well. But these are pictures of inside the reconstruction hangar at the Kennedy Space Center. You see him working on a tile there. That's a piece of the leading edge of the wing. Some more tile and wing material. Just different views of the guys looking at the different pieces and trying to figure out where on the ship they went.
One of the things that was, well, this is where I guess the bulk of Columbia ended up in these bins. Most of the debris was actually very, very small. But
yeah, most of the debris, well, I always like to say, most of the debris was the size of your cell phone or smaller. And anything that had to do with the belly of the orbiter or the wings, then that got laid out on the grid on the floor of the hangar. All the system stuff, wiring and different system components, that's what was stored in boxes along the side of the hangar there. You can see some of those brown boxes in the back. That's Columbia, and that's about, it's pulled in nose first. So the nose of the orbiter is down in this picture. You can see the nose cap at the very bottom, being pointed to now, and the nose landing gear tires right behind it. So it's pulled in towards you, and it's upside down, so it's belly side up. So we were able to study the different pieces in their orientation on the ship. And that particular picture was about 2/3 of the way through the recovery. So that represented most of the debris. I mean, after the first couple of months, the amount of debris we were getting back was diminishing, and so that picture, that was about 2/3 of all the debris we found. This is a tile table. We realized early on in the investigation we had to lay the tiles out in their logical orientation. So we built this table that allowed us to put the tiles in place exactly where they would have been on the ship, and that helped quite a bit with burn patterns and scorching and just to see the effects of neighboring tiles, et cetera. So this was a really good move to build that tile table. There's Ann Miklos working on the tiles. You can see the shape of them. Some of them have very, very bad scorching and slumping, it was called, where the material itself actually overheated and melted. A lot of that damage, of course, is just physical damage from the breakup and the fall to the ground.
One of the things that amazed me in interviewing people for this was that the people who were doing this reconstruction and the forensic analysis were the same people who worked on Columbia as engineers and technicians as part of the regular processing flow. So these people were intimately familiar with how this space shuttle worked and what all of these systems look like and how they fit together. And then they kind of completely changed from being operations and processing people to now becoming investigators into this accident. Everybody looking at how the orbiter failed and helping to tell the story through the debris.
And it was that familiarity with the orbiters that helped make the decision. Well, it did make the decision to do the reconstruction back here in Florida. The folks at the Johnson Space Center, we were only a few miles north of JSC. And so they lobbied to do the reconstruction, but our guys knew the ship better physically knew the ship better than the engineers in Houston, and so we were asked to do the reconstruction back here. That's Lyle Davis working on pieces of the reinforced carbon leading edge of the wing. See him trying to piece them together. It was just a huge jigsaw puzzle effort, and he was able to work on thicknesses and shapes, and eventually be able to put small pieces of reinforced carbon like that in their logical orientation on that table, and then eventually onto a display unit that we built.
Well, you see those little tiny pieces of the RCC there and think that every one of those things was picked up somewhere out there on the ground in Texas. It's absolutely incredible, the amount of material, how carefully those searchers found things out there. It's absolutely amazing.
There's a much younger launch director, and pointing at the display units for the leading edge of the wing. We built these plexiglass frames where we could attach the pieces of the leading edge of the wing in their orientation and be able to view the outside and the inside of the leading edge at the same time, and that allowed us to trace burn patterns and the way the molten material on the inside of the wing was laid down, and so that allowed us to really study the RCC once we got it in its right orientation. This is the OEX recorder. It's a modular auxiliary data system. It's a magnetic tape recorder. Only Columbia had it, and it measured hundreds of sensors all around Columbia. Columbia was the first ship to be built, and consequently, it had all sorts of instrumentation on it to characterize how it flew. You know, from thermocouples to acoustic sensors, strain gauges, any type of sensor you can imagine was on Columbia. And this particular recorder only recorded during launch and landing. It was off during the mission, but it captured the ascent loads, and also the landing loads, the reentry loads when it still had power. Once it lost power, obviously it was no longer functioning. But that was the one piece of equipment, and Jerry referred to it. That's the one piece of equipment that the engineers really wanted to get back, because we knew it had a lot of data in it. And it turned out that recorder, only the outer two windings of the magnetic tape around those reels were compromised. The rest of it had perfectly good data from launch and landing till it lost power. And you can see the condition of the box. I mean, the boxes, you can read the serial number on that box, and that was in an avionics bay inside the crew module of Columbia. And right next to it in the same avionics bay were other black boxes that were just beat to hell and almost unrecognizable. But the one piece of equipment that we really wanted to find was that recorder, and it was in almost pristine shape.
Yeah, and we had gone through this area where we did recover it, and it was one of my teams. I was glad of that. We had a bet going on out there at Hemp-Hill who would find it. But we found it after the third pass through the same area. So it took us 3 different attempts before we found it. And like you said, Mike, it was in pristine condition, and we had it run back by escort and everything else to get it back to Lufkin and back down to JSC as fast as we could. So that was a big thing for us.
Very big. Let's see, this is a test of the, during the investigation, you know, we wanted to test to see if foam would damage the RCC, and obviously it can. The piece of foam that hit the leading edge of the wing of Columbia was about the size of a carry-on suitcase, weighed 1.2 pounds, but the speed at impact, the velocity impact was over 500 miles per hour, because when that piece of foam broke off the tank, you know, relatively large and lightweight, so it slowed down the atmosphere very quickly, but the orbiter was still accelerating. And so what really happened was the foam didn't hit the wing, the orbiter flew into that piece of foam and the wing hit it. And that was enough of an impact to damage, to open up a breach in the thermal protection system.
The question came up in chat about how did this correlate with the work of the Columbia Accident Investigation Board. And you had members of the Accident Investigation Boards there in the reconstruction hangar, and they were also at Johnson studying the data, and they were also at the Southwest Research Institute doing these tests. So you had basically 3 different independent tests to try to determine what happened to Columbia. Mike's team was using the physical evidence from what was recovered on the ground. Johnson was using the data that was either telemetered down from Columbia or was recovered in that OEX recorder, and then we also had this test with actual pieces of shuttle leading edge and foam. And so all 3 agreed that this was the cause of the accident.
Let's see, contributing causes of organizational structure and complacency. The mission management team was a team that was created after the Challenger accident to bring to knowledge of the launch team, the launch director, and the rest of the launch team, any issues that might be being worked by the team outside of the launch itself. And so mission management team, they have to give a go on launch day, and they are active in the launch, and they're active in the landing, and they're active during the whole mission. But they're more of an operational oriented team. They disregarded some of the indicators. We had people on from engineering that called to get pictures of Columbia in orbit, and they decided, the management team decided not to get those photos. And the other one, minimize the effects of other parameters. We only had one computer model to predict damage to the orbiter, and that was based on ice hitting tile, not foam hitting leading edge or tile. And so, but it was the only model we had, and so we had to extrapolate the inputs into that model, and therefore the output was well, it wasn't right. 16-day mission proceed as if non-critical damage would survive. That's the crater model that I just talked about. Is the only tool that we had, and so we had to use that. And the other thing is the last line there, the previous non-consequential foam loss and strikes clouded the problem resolution process. That's extremely important because we'd had foam come off the external tank virtually every mission. A lot of it was very, very small, would never do any damage, but some of them were quite large, and there's a couple of pictures of them. But they never caused that big problem, and so human nature being what it is, we made an assumption, either subconsciously or consciously, that the foam can't damage the vehicle because it never had before. Well, that's the wrong approach to take. You've got to attack every problem as it's a new problem, and assume the worst and talk your way into something better rather than assume it's going to be okay and then let it go. And so that complacency really haunted us in the shuttle program a few times, actually. Between Challenger and Columbia, there's some real similarities. On the hardware side, some of you may remember the Challenger accident was caused by faulty O-rings inside the solid rocket motors. That it was so cold that day that they didn't perform their sealing function as they should have. Challenger was the 25th flight of the Space Shuttle program. About half of the missions prior to Challenger had some amount of erosion, heat effect on those O-rings. So we knew we had a design issue there, and when we were working on a fix to it, but we ran out of time on Challenger. Same thing with Columbia. We'd had, like I said, we had foam come off the tank virtually every mission, but it never caused that big problem. And so management acceptance of specification violations became commonplace. We had waivers all over the place for different requirements that we had. And we call that normalization of deviance. We have a problem, you have a repetitive problem, and if it never gets you in trouble, you kind of subconsciously begin to accept that that's the way it should be, and that's the wrong way to go. The perceived schedule pressure to launch, that was more true in the Challenger days than Columbia, but nevertheless, we were in the business to launch and provide these services to to the country. And so while there wasn't any big schedule pressure to launch Columbia, there was schedule awareness that we wanted to launch, and that was our business. The only safe way to conduct spaceflight is not to launch at all. And so we were in the business to launch, and that's what we did. And the last sentence I already talked about that. We almost got an unspoken feeling of invincibility, and that will just kill you. It is exactly the wrong approach to take. This is a slide I put together. Most significant common technical thread, really kind of already talked about this. The assumption that minor problems will remain minor. Continued success exacerbates this assumption. True in both Challenger and Columbia. The management failure thread is complacency. Here again, we had O-ring issues on half of the missions prior to Challenger, and we had foam issues on practically every mission leading up to Columbia. The way you get around that is stick to requirements as written. And if you cannot stick to the requirement, well, then you got to stop and talk about it. But we had hundreds of waivers in the space shuttle program for requirements that we couldn't meet. So the engineers developed their requirements, and then here we go into the test phase or the flight phase, and you can't meet them. Well, what do? You waive them, and that's a common practice in NASA. And Jerry, you can probably talk of the waiver process better than me, easily.
Well, and the thing is, you like you said, it's a common practice that we have. In fact, it's still going on the same as far as wavering. The one thing at least we did get at point 2 was the fact that you had a dissenting opinion, you could take it up the chain all the way to the administrator now, and be able to get yourself heard with whatever issue it is that you're concerned with. Before, we didn't have that avenue, and it basically, was, as I was told, we were in the business of launching, and that's what we're going to stick with. So even if we had issues like with the foam, we knew it. We had a lot of meetings on the foam. I can remember sitting in plenty of them, and the fact that we could never come to resolution on it. And we just said, well, best we could do. And it hasn't hurt anything yet. So,
right.
The communication chain, getting it up to management visibility, a big lesson learned from Challenger. I mean, Mike, you were saying that the discussion that was going on with Thiokol with the O-rings, the debate about not launching never even got to the launch director. The launch director didn't even know there had been that conversation the night before, or that kind of concern about it.
Right. That's particularly troubling. And that caused the creation of the mission management team to make sure those kinds of discussions were passed forward to the launch director. But a group of engineers from Marshall Space Flight Center who designed the boosters. These are the people that design the boosters and know those O-rings better than anybody. They got together the night before Challenger's launch because they knew it was going to be too cold to launch the next morning, and they were lobbying to postpone launch based on the cold weather. And they went into this meeting. It was about 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning prior to launch. And in walked a mid-level NASA manager and decided that he would be the one to make that decision, not the engineering group. And so he decided, this mid-level NASA manager decided not to tell senior management nor the launch director about their concern the night before. And then Challenger, the morning of Challenger, it was 17 degrees overnight, had icicles on the launch pad. But the weather, the temperature criteria for liftoff was met. And so the launch director, Gene Thomas, rest his soul, he launched because he met his criteria. But the criteria were wrong. That's what this team of engineers the night before was trying to get across to people, that the requirement was wrong. They just never got heard. Terrible decision process.
Well, the question just came up here in the chat here. Why were the pictures denied for Columbia? I guess the same kind of thing. I think, Mike, you used the words in the book. You said, prove to me that it's not safe to come home is very different than prove to me that it is safe to come home.
Right. You got to prove it it's safe to fly rather than prove it's unsafe to fly. That means that those are two totally different approaches to problem resolution. Those people that made those decisions, well-intended people, but they just made the wrong decision. Let's see, responding in crisis situations. We had a saying that was created by one of our center directors here. It's the first one there. Here's how we can, not why we can't. So many people in the space business will tend to adopt well, we can't do that. Well, no, show me how we can. And if we really can't, well, that's fine, but let's give it the old try first. And so that's a motto that mottos are good. This particular one I really like. Here's how we can, not why we can't. And that should drive your thinking on all problem resolutions. We are where we are. Very easy to say that. When push comes to shove in problem resolution, it's sometimes tough to get your point across, especially if you're a mid-level engineer, not a senior guy. Bringing your dissenting opinion forward in these large meetings was very, very difficult, and especially for the younger engineers. And so that drove a change in the way we did business after Columbia, was that we required people to have a dissenting opinion in these large meetings, because our program manager at the time said, look, there's 50 people here or 100 people in this meeting. I'm sure someone doesn't agree with the decision I just made. And we're not going to leave this meeting until someone speaks up and says, I got a different view of this. And so we would sit there until someone raised their hand and said, I've got a difference of opinion here. It was a little awkward, but it drove home the point that regardless of your position in the hierarchy of the organization, if you have something to say it. Don't sit on your thumb and assume that someone else is going to take care of it. If you got something to say it.
And that's one thing that I preached up until my day of retirement. The one thing we had, of course, Mike, you're well aware of the SF status that OSMA put out, the SF coin and everything else. Instead of telling people, no, you can't do this, or no, you can't do that, we started instructing the people to start saying, hey, be with them, work with them, help them. They need the answers. They don't need to be told why they can't. Tell them how they can. So it's always come down to now, yes, if you do it this way, or yes, if you do it that way, to help them work the issues that they had. And that's something we didn't have previously.
Very good. Yep. Jonathan, you want to take this?
Yeah, I mean, it just, again, is the human nature. It just seems to be that we try to find ways to work around things. We set up these rules, and we find out, as you were saying, Mike, with complacency, that hey, there's really no need to do this. The mission is going well. With Columbia, it happened. Part of the trying to figure out what happened with the foam strike happened over the Martin Luther King Day weekend, and the mission management team wanted to take the 3-day weekend. So they didn't meet every day like they were required to by the procedures, because everything seemed to be going fine with the mission as flown. And so it is kind of human nature to work around those kind of things if you don't feel that procedure is necessary. So that you need to make sure that the rules that you have mean something, and that those are the right rules to have in place, and that you follow those things vigorously and enforce them. Normalization of deviance. It's great that the shuttle is strong and has survived all these previous impacts, but the requirement is that nothing hits the belly of the orbiter. And as you were saying, that got violated on almost every mission. And you start feeling like just because we got away with it before, we can get away with it again. And that's just it. Again, it is human nature, and so it takes really active management by everybody in the organization to model these kinds of behaviors. As you were saying, Mike, it can be very awkward to force people to speak up if they do have disagreements. If somebody's got to go first, and it's always hard to be the person who goes first and does this, because everybody else waiting to see what's going to happen. Is this guy going to get his head chopped off for speaking up, or is he going to be congratulated? And so that has to be modeled from the top of the organization all the way down.
Indeed. Let's see, this is a slide I borrowed from our administrator back during the time of the accident, Sean O'Keefe. And this was about restoring the brand after you have a major incident. What do you need to do to convince yourselves and the public that you're safe to go? Safety culture test means the same thing to all hands. Well, it's one thing to come out with a new policy or a new directive, whatever, but you have to make sure that the people understand the genesis of that new requirement. Why are we levying this new action on everybody? And hopefully people can buy into it, but you need to explain it so that everybody understands why we're making that change. Solutions to the problem need to include a role for everyone. It's everyone's responsibility in a large program like this to be safety oriented and do the right thing. But that's really true. You have to trust everyone to do their job the best they can, from senior leaders down to the technician on the floor. Message to the external audience matters a lot. When we were getting ready to fly again after Columbia, explaining what we had done to the fleet and what we had done to our management practices, we had to explain that to the public and to Congress and all other stakeholders that we really are taking this serious and we've made changes and we're ready to go. And then let's see, the last one is articulate the renewed safety culture. Maybe Jerry, maybe you could talk about that one.
Well, the renewed safety culture, the renewed safety culture basically is, if you have something that's wrong and you don't say nothing, you're just going to create the problem. Speak up, make your voice heard, use a dissenting opinion and process, use, whatever process you have, that you can do. Now, the one thing we did sit with a lot of the commercial vendors that are now, like SpaceX and Starliner and everything else. And we did go over them, how we developed our process after Columbia, with the lessons we learned out of that. So they did hear the same story that we pressed on since the accident happened 20 years ago. So each year we go through this and we make sure lessons learned are brought up again and again and again. So we don't go through the same process of having this happen. And one of the things that, is that the fact that the process for the safety culture, it was a silent safety organization back then. We were told not to say anything because it wasn't our job. It was up to the other folks that launched the vehicle to make sure that it would go. And of course, I fought that tooth and nail, but now we finally got where it should be. And now you got technical authorities for all those different areas. And those would be the people that would bring about ultimate decisions.
We're getting a lot of questions here coming into it. I guess this is the end of the slides here, where people, of course, are very interested in seeing what is now being described as NASA's biggest safety-related challenge in a generation. It's been a generation since the Columbia accident, and now we're seeing this playing out live before us with what's going on with Starliner and the decision-making process that's going on. And I know it's probably on people's minds to kind of hear what you guys think about how the new NASA safety culture is playing out. And of course, it's very frustrating for people not to get a clear answer one way or the other, right? Everybody seems to be Monday morning quarterbacking all the decisions that are going on. But I think that's probably something that's top of everybody's mind right now. What do you guys think about what's going on?
Jonathan, could you just stop sharing so that we can
Sure,
see
absolutely.
your much bigger? Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay.
There we go.
Well, let's see. I'll start.
Yeah.
Let's see. I've communicated with the program manager for Starliner, the NASA program manager, and they're doing it right this time. They're taking their time. They're understanding the problem. If this had been under the old process of cursory check on different systems and analyses and like that, Sonny and Butch would either be home by now safe or not. But NASA is taking into account what happened on Challenger, what happened on Columbia, and they're making their decision. And when they get to a decision, it'll be the right decision. They're going to do the right thing. Will it be to come home on Starliner? I don't know yet. They don't know yet. But whatever they do, that's going to be the right decision. And they're taking their time doing it, based in large part on how we didn't do that during the other two accidents.
Mike, am I correct that the program manager for Starliner for Boeing is Leroy Kane, who was he was the entry flight director for Columbia when the accident happened? So
Yes.
somebody who
True.
knows very clearly, has personally experienced the tragedy of what happens when things don't go well, and so obviously, this is something he is not taking cavalierly at all.
No, not at all. And no one else is either this time. It's good to see it. Is it frustrating that they're not getting to a decision quickly? Well, yeah, but so what? Butch and Sonny are perfectly happy. They're fine. They're safe in orbit. They can stay up there for months more if they need to. So they'll get to a decision and they'll get home safely. There's no doubt in my mind.
Jerry, your thoughts?
Yeah, and I kind of say the same thing there that Mike says, except I was kind of a little bit concerned when they did the launch with the leak already on board and already knowing that that was a ongoing effort. I talked with Russ Deloach, who's the OSMA chief. He's a good person, and he's making sure that they're using the technical authorities to make the right decisions and make sure that they have all the information they need, not just speculating, but no fact over fact, and that's the biggest thing of that, is to make sure we got the facts and make sure we know exactly what the testing is steering us to. And if Sonny and them have to stay up there until February, that's okay. They're perfectly safe to do that, and they could become part of the mission crew and work whatever they need to work. So I don't think rushing into anything to bring them back is the right answer right now.
Right.
Great. Thanks, guys. I want to try to get some of these other questions. A lot have come in, a lot were asked beforehand, but I think I'd like to start with one to go to Mike and to Jerry, that obviously there were so many people involved in the recovery effort, but how did you two as NASA people, this was your family who was lost, how did that affect what you were doing out there and trying to recover both the Columbia and the crew?
Well, boy, that was a tough time. I'll share the one story that I actually put in the book. The day of the accident, I was standing next to the runway here in Florida waiting for the crew to come home, and they just never showed up. And so that just turned into a bunch of meetings with the administrator and all this stuff. And then I took the first team on a Air Force jet out to Barksdale Air Force Base that night. And I kept my act together during the day as the leader of that group. But then when I got to my hotel room that night, I flipped on TV out of habit, just flip on the TV. And there I saw the accident again, and I lost it. I just lost it, and it had welled up all day, and it finally released. I was alone in my hotel room, and cried myself to sleep that night.
Yeah, and we all felt like Mike did, and we all had our stories on similar things. I had, and it probably helped me a lot. I was trained when I was in the Air Force of doing recovery missions. So I had a lot of the experience behind that with some fighter jets that I had to go in and do a recovery of particular elements out of that. So you learn things as you go along. But the one thing I always learned was the fact that I try to keep my thoughts to myself. And when I want them to come out, I'll do it in my privately owned area. And then when I'm out there performing the function, I want them to look at me and be able to say, hey, we know we can trust him to get us to where we need to go. And so, that's why I ended up staying out there, I guess, for the whole 4.5 months, from the day one when I flew out with Mike. And of course, he sent me down to Lufkin, and we ended up doing what we had to do. So and then when I got back, that's when things hit me. When I got back, and it's in the book there too. You'll see that, where my wife even made speculation that when I came back, I wasn't the same person that went out. You know, it's two different people. We had a hard time sharing things and everything else. It was hard to talk about what went on, you know, and it hits you with one night when you're just sitting by yourself and you think about it. And, you know, the one thing we did always in, you know, when we did the readiness reviews prior to missions, we always got to shake the hands of the astronauts. And Mike, you know, that's always been a big thing. And so we got to say bye to them and everything else, you know, in that sense. But, you know, to go out there and do the remain recovery, and you have this picture in your head of what you saw before it happened, and then when you saw when you went out there, it was hard. So it took me a long time to get over it, and I had to go through some special counseling when I did get back, and make sure that I was okay to go up to Washington and do the job I had to do up there then.
One of the things that I really appreciated about that I learned to really like about Mike as a manager was hearing how he helped the people in the reconstruction hangar go through their emotions, because an engineer would come across a system that they've been working on, or a piece of something that they had touched and now saw it burned and charred and twisted and melted, and it would just bring a flood of emotions. And so Mike did a great job of helping to manage that, and you know, creating safe space for people to be able to let it out and to jointly grieve together, watching videos of the crew or things like that. And then going out and blowing off steam by going out to a minor league baseball game or something like that, just to try to keep the morale up. Just fantastic leadership lessons.
How were the other people involved in the recovery affected? You know, you probably talked to quite a few of them, the FBI, the Forest Service, the EPA, local law enforcement. How did they react?
Well, and I'll touch on that a little bit, because they did react similar to what we did. In a sense, they didn't know how we felt like family-wise, but they took it upon themselves. Like I said, they really come out and said, hey, this mission has become our mission. And they did it not with only the physical aspects, but the emotional aspects as well too. You know, I probably cried on Linda Gay's shoulder enough times, and now we're like brother and sister. So we keep with each other all the time and talk whenever we get down and everything else. And one of the things they do when you're in the search effort is, of course, the fire teams also have counselors that are out there to help you get through different emotion, you know, issues and everything else. And they're for everybody, you know, for even the townspeople or anybody that needs their help. But I told them, I said, put your cards away. I don't want to see you until after I'm done here. And then when Mike tells me I can go home, I'll go home, and then we'll go through it from there. So.
Some of the FBI guys.
Mostly the people out there in the field, the other agencies, the federal, state, local, and the volunteers, they all took it on as a personal challenge, a personal commitment, as if they knew the astronauts and worked for NASA. It was just beautiful to see. There was no bickering between this organization and that agency. It just worked out fine, because everybody had the same goal, and that was to help NASA in their time of need. And it was just an American success story from that perspective.
Very inspiring, and just showing us at our best in reacting to this great tragedy. Quite a few other questions. I want to see if we could try to get into them. There was a hand raised. If someone does want to ask a question, we will do that toward the end and turn on your mic if you do raise your hand. But I do see a few of the questions that were in the Q&A. One from Bob. Was there any correlation between where the crew members were seated and where they were found, or was it probably just random? I don't know if you could tell that.
The identification of the crew members and where they were located has never been released publicly outside of I think even the family members don't know where their loved ones came down.
Question from Tom: was there any consideration to adjusting the attitude of the orbiter to get a better look at the left wing from the ground camera, or was it just not feasible?
Well, we studied after the accident, we studied all sorts of things like that,
Right.
but during the mission, you know, we were sitting back fat, dumb, and happy thinking that everything was okay. So we didn't even entertain anything like that. We did during the investigation, though, we looked at, could we have adjusted the angle of attack of the vehicle as it was slowing down the atmosphere, but that would have only helped just a tiny, tiny bit. And so the damage, whatever the damage was to Columbia, there was nothing that a flight regime could have helped with.
David asks, and you actually touched on this, Mike, about the electronics. I understand some electronic devices were found that were able to be powered up. Can you describe what other electronics were found and what condition they were in? I know you touched on a few of them that were really wrecked.
Yeah, really wrecked bad. One of the interesting things is one day in the hangar, as the debris was coming back, we got back a canister from one of the payloads that was in the Space Hab module, and it had nematodes in it, and the nematodes were still alive, and we calculated they're on their fifth or sixth generation, because they die and reproduce very quickly. But that was the only thing that we got back that was alive, and so that was a bittersweet day too.
Question from Mike, and maybe we don't want to probably touch on this, but it's about the shape of the crew they were found in, and I know we probably want to respect the privacy there.
Yep.
Okay. I guess there's a lot of questions about why
Events, but no, once the crew module lost pressure, the crew died very quickly, and so they didn't experience the big breakup. They were gone before the vehicle actually broke up, you know, badly.
Very good. Let me get a few of the other questions that were here. We talked a little bit about the effort to take some pictures from the ground. Mike, can you touch a little bit more on why the pictures were denied? I know the recent CNN special that was on Columbia talked a lot about that.
Well, I didn't see the CNN special for different reasons, but I know the people who made the decisions. They are friends of mine. I have never to this day been able to figure out why photos from on orbit were denied. Just don't know.
Right. And as you both said, the no one wanted anything bad to happen. These were well-meaning people. It's just that the decisions were not the correct decisions.
Right.
There was a question from Lonnie about Starliner, and I think we've covered that. Another question about the pictures. Another question about Starliner, so maybe we'll touch on that. Let's see.
What is the Starliner everybody's talking about?
But factor this in about we're talking about Starliner, but what about Artemis as we plan to go back to the moon? Have these things been factored into that program?
Well, a lot of them have, especially the management practices. We went through, as we were preparing to refly the shuttle after Columbia, we went through a lot of training on critical decision-making, tough discussions and questions and answers. And so all managers went through that sort of training to help us get the workforce to raise issues and be open with their ideas and suggestions. And that has very definitely carried through to the new program. Jerry, you have anything to add?
You're right on right there, is the fact that one of the things I noted before retiring was, we had to go and train all senior management and what they would do if we had something happen on the moon. And I remember I had to come up with 10 different scenarios, put them through and see what they would do. And so we did at least worked that kind from the higher up on down. And then we also, did it for lower levels where they needed us to come in and do that particular training. So I believe with Artemis, you're going to see a lot more of a look and make sure everything's ready to go before we do it.
And one other thing to add, if I may, the debris from Columbia is stored in the vehicle assembly building on the 16th floor in an air-conditioned room, and we've had managers and engineers from numerous different commercial companies come through that room and look at the debris and realize what can happen if you make a bad decision or don't make a decision at all. And so then they take that back to their organization and train using that technique. And so we've had CEOs all the way down to the journeyman level engineers, hundreds of people come through the debris room to see the debris, to realize that we're in a zero fault tolerant business. And if you make a bad decision, this is what can happen.
Yeah.
I see a question from John that's interesting. Your analysis of the organizational culture doesn't mention the word curiosity. The lack of technical curiosity on the part of engineers and managers seems to me to have been a major contributor to the Columbia accident. Any thoughts on that?
I've heard the term used, failure of imagination, and it's one of the contributing factors for the Apollo 1 accident as well, just failure to imagine that something like that could go wrong. I think, again, people get kind of locked into the way things have worked, and thinking outside the box is very difficult to do. And it's just, again, human nature. Sometimes you need somebody from the outside to come and rattle the cage a little bit.
The use of a good fault tree gets into that too, that if you have an issue you're trying to resolve, and if you put together a really good fault tree, you're going to capture a lot of that curiosity, because you end up talking about things that are, 0.001% chance of happening, but nevertheless you talk about it because it could be a contributing factor. So from that perspective, that curiosity comes in when we develop the fault trees.
Or even questioning the requirements sometimes too, as well. I mean, I think we were talking, Eileen had talked about the rendezvous pitch around maneuver for going up to the space station. There was a requirement that the commander always had to have the space station in sight. And someone said, well, what if you didn't have to have that, if you were a safe distance away and you could spin the space shuttle around to inspect the belly of it?
Let's see if there are a few more questions. I want to see if it's in the chat, because appreciate you guys. We're going a little bit over time, so I want to try to get a few other questions in. There is a comment from Greg at the end of the crew recovery. He requested a memorial service to aid our Hemphil searchers with closure. Brent Jett delivered a wonderful message. Okay, just thought I'd add that there. Valerie's asking, could the payload bay door on the port side have been raised or closed temporarily to take a look at the wing leading edge from the aft flight deck? I don't know if visually that would have worked or not.
It could have been repositioned, yeah. That's a technique that you didn't often use, but we could have. And here again, why we didn't, I don't know the answer to that, Valerie.
And one last question about, and there was also a question in there about, in the questions that were submitted beforehand, about some senior managers left NASA after Challenger. Did the same thing happen after Columbia?
Some senior managers were reassigned. If you're a career civil servant, typically you wouldn't get fired over something like this, but you do get reassigned, and that happened to several of them.
Very good. Let me see a couple more questions just to cover. And this really goes to you, Jonathan and Mike. In terms of writing this book, what surprised you from all the research? And it said, what kind of feedback have you received from readers who've had a chance to go through the book?
Go ahead, Jonathan.
Well, I mean, I think initially we started off, we were going to be telling the story of Mike and his rapid response team. And the more people we interviewed, like for example, astronaut Jerry Ross said, hey, the story is out in Texas. You need to go out there and talk to the people in Texas. And we had to build the trust with them that it was okay, because they've had a lot of people poking around, asking questions about condition of the crew and things like that. They wanted to make sure that I was on the level. They vetted me very thoroughly before they let me come out there and interview them. But getting to meet some of the folks out there was just absolutely wonderful. And some of the great things was to interview somebody, one of the citizens in Hemphill, and I had talked to a person that they had interacted with from NASA, and the two of them had lost touch with each other, and so we put them back together again. And so it was nice to kind of rekindle some of those kinds of the friendships. But I had no idea what had gone on out there, and I think that was one of the things that we heard from the NASA folks, either in the recovery operations or in the reconstruction hangar, that I knew something was going on out there in one place or the other, but I never knew how it all fit together. And so this was the first time that we ever got a chance to really kind of see the whole picture. And what happened to this piece that I picked up out in the field somewhere? What did it actually, how did it actually get analyzed, and how did it help tell the story?
Jonathan, tell them about the Evelyn's comment about the book.
Well, that was to me. I mean, Mike and I we did not interview the crew families. I don't know, Mike, if you had any contact with them. I know the folks, Belinda and Marcia in Texas did, but we didn't have. We deliberately tried to keep it to what was going on with the recovery. But when we finally, when the book came out and we were going down to Hemphill for the an anniversary of the accident. I think it was the 15th anniversary of the accident, and we had a meeting at Johnson, and Evelyn husband Thompson was there, and she asked us to sign copies of the book for her and for her children, and that's when I knew that we had done a good job, and I sure breathed a sigh of relief.
How long did it take you to put the book together, or from research to finishing it?
It's about a little under 2 years to do the actual research and writing. Maybe a little less than that. It was about 2 years from when we started to when it finally came out. It was about a year after we submitted the manuscript before it finally got published.
And is there any plans for a film version, a documentary?
Go ahead, Jonathan.
The book has been optioned right now for development. For development.
Okay.
Okay, so
Very good. Well, I do want to thank you all, Jerry, Jonathan, Mike. A really touching and inspirational story as we recount this terrible tragedy. So we appreciate you doing it with such humanity as you described everything. What I want to do now, before we close out, is do our virtual book giveaway. And everybody who's on, what I've done here, I've put the list together of everybody who registered. It's not done alphabetically. It was done by the order in which you registered, and just assigned a number to your name in order. And what I'm doing is I'm going to be using a random number generator on my iPad. And hopefully you can, if I call your name, just put an indication into the chat. And that way I can make sure you're here and you affirm it. So that way we can give you your book. So let me try this first now. Okay, and I've got the first one. Actually, Mike Helton. Mike, are you on still? Just put a comment in the chat. I don't see anything yet. Let me just take a quick look.
yes, he's there. Okay.
There you are. Yes.
Yeah.
Great.
Yay.
Very good. You got it, Mike. Okay, I'm making a note of that. And I'll go on to the second one. Carol Amato. Carol, are you on?
Yes.
Fabulous. Okay. And just to let everyone know, Jonathan has the books. He's going to be signing them, and then he's sending them to Mike for signing, and then we'll send them out to you. So you'll have two autographs. Okay, and let's see. We've got Chris Wellborn. We're 2 for 2. I hope we're 3 for 3. Let's see.
Not yet.
Not yet. Chris? What I'll do is I'll just look to see through our list right now just to confirm. I don't want to pass somebody up. Nope, I do not see Chris. I'm going to do another one. Okay. Just coincidence, Christine Noby. Christine, are you on?
Yes.
Oh, wow. Okay, great. And we'll try to get the last one here. Okay. And Joe Bruce. Joe, are you on? See, I don't see it yet. Nope, doesn't look like it.
Okay.
Okay, one more, we'll try. Wes Trayer. Wes?
Yep.
Yes, great. Great, everybody. We've got our 4 door prizes. Thank you so much for sticking around. So very good, everybody. So what I want to do now is just close out. Again, I want to thank Jonathan and Mike and Jerry for just sharing this incredible story. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your schedules to do this, plus all that you did, Mike and Jerry, to bring Columbia home, and Jonathan to help really share this story with all of us. We really thank you for doing that. On behalf of my other colleagues from NSS, Fred Becker and Larry Ahern, I want to just thank them for all their help in supporting these space forums. And I also want to thank our Galactic Medallion colleagues, Elizabeth Schneider and Kirby Runyon. And we're going to see you at the tours. So let me just share my screen one more time, everybody, before we close out. Okay, we did the virtual door prize, so thanks again, everybody, for that. So thank you for joining us tonight and sticking around. It was a really informative and inspiring space forum. So for those of you who are going to be joining us next week, we look forward to having you there for Robert Zubrin's talking about his new book, and we'll continue getting the schedule work together for the rest of our space forums and town halls through the rest of the year. So thank you all for attending this evening. We appreciate it. We appreciate your support. I wish you a great evening. For those of you who are in tomorrow's time zone, wishing you a great day ahead. All of you have a great weekend. Stay safe. We'll see you next week. Take care.
Thank you, Bert.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Stop the recording there.